Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
You're listening to Giles Brown on TRE Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain. Re-entry, SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the reusable rockets that launched a second space age is a new book by Eric Berger. Eric is the senior space editor at Ars Technica, and I'm delighted to say he joins me live on the line now. Eric, good afternoon from us. Good morning to you.
Thanks very much, Giles. Good morning. Good afternoon to you as well.
Well, whereabouts do we find you today, by the way? Whereabouts are you?
I live in Houston, Texas, so just a couple miles from Johnson Space Center.
So tell me a little bit about, then, this fascination, if you like, with Elon Musk, with space. Why do you think that he is so committed to this whole program?
He has been committed to it for at least a quarter of a century now, and I think it stems from a fundamental belief he has that humans need to be living on multiple worlds. He has a belief that at some point our species will come to problems here on Earth, not because of climate change or something like that, I don't think, but more like we could face an asteroid like the dinosaurs or nuclear war, and he just feels like it's our destiny to spread among the stars, and so he wants to push humanity to take that first step.
When I was a child, it was the time of sort of things like Skylab and the Viking program, things like that, and the shuttles. Obviously, it seemed almost definitive that we would end up on other planets, and that sort of stalled, didn't it, in the 80s and 90s, obviously because of the disasters that happened. So Musk is taking perhaps this and has seen the opportunity to pick up where official agencies perhaps let go.
I think he grew up in that same milieu and watched things like Star Trek and saw NASA building the space shuttle and said, well, this is the future. That's great. That's the world I want to live in. And then, he sort of went off and did some businesses and got some education. And when he looked up and had made his first initial fortune, he saw that wasn't the case. In fact, he saw that we weren't really going anywhere fast in space, and it was dominated by big companies that were seeking profits. And he wanted to change that. I just think it was as simple and as fundamental as that. And that was led to the founding of SpaceX, and it's just kind of grown and grown from there into something that was, it was just kind of a fairy tale to start, and it became real over time.
One of the things is, if you look at these sort of startups, you think about Apple starting in a garage. You think of, obviously, the social media giants and whatever else, and it always seems to be a sort of collection of outsiders, and perhaps you can argue that the space industry had become too corporate, too insider, too sort of hidebound, and so it needed a shake-up. And this is exactly where SpaceX, excuse the pun, takes off.
I think that's right. He started out. It's interesting. Some of his earliest meetings were with some of the leaders in the space industry, trying to figure out how he was going to get in. And he had this one big meeting early in 2002. And he kind of went around the table and said, I'm going to found a space company. Who wants to join me? And almost none of them did, except for, this propulsion engineer named Tom Mueller, guy at Boeing named Chris Thompson, and a couple other people. And it started there just really, really small. It wasn't quite in a garage, but the first building they worked in I've been to was pretty small.
And I suppose the thing is, they obviously he's got a range of projects he's been involved in, but it's an awfully long sort of leap of faith and technological know-how to go from cars and vehicles to sort of the ultimate vehicle, which is to carry men and payloads into the most forbidding environment that we know thus far.
It's pretty crazy, It was only just 15 years ago that they finally succeeded in launching their first small rocket. It was called the Falcon 1. It had just a single main engine, could only carry a few hundred kilograms into space. And now in Texas, they're launching a rocket that could potentially carry hundreds of tons to space, far larger than any other vehicle ever built, potentially fully reusable. They really have come a long, long way and revolutionized spaceflight in the process.
And with reusable rockets, are we presumably looking at something that is easier to recycle? Because I mean, I remember rockets with the Saturn, was it Saturn V, and the things that sent, all the Apollo shots and whatever, huge, but not usable again. And that's why we have the shuttle that comes in, but obviously massively expensive, to put it mildly, and the mishaps or the loss of life we see. To have a reusable rocket obviously is again a game changer, and opens up a whole new vista, if you will, for where we're going in space.
Yeah, we don't really know where we're going. That's the promise of Starship. You mentioned the Saturn V. The missions that we flew to the moon back in the 60s and early 70s, you looked at that entire stack of the vehicle, and the rocket, different parts of it fell in different oceans around the world or went off into space. And, of course, the capsule came back to Earth, but we put those in museums. The idea with Starship is that a vehicle that's bigger and twice as powerful, we reuse the whole thing again and again. So it's more like an airplane operation than a spacecraft, a spaceship, which was, had one use. And the possibility with that is we don't really understand, because we've never before been able to have sort of potentially cheap and frequent and reliable access to space. And so it opens up a whole new potential for human activity that didn't exist before.
So the startup days, I mean, in the press notes there are various sort of little bits and pieces, but putting a cheese wheel into a wheel of cheese into orbit. Now, this obviously leaps out, because normally it's all about rocket propulsion units, where we're going in the future, etc. The wheel of cheese obviously leapt out to me.
Yeah, that was on the second Falcon 9 rocket launch they did back in December of 2010, and the idea was, well, they're testing out the Dragon spacecraft for the first time, and what's something that they could put in there that's kind of fun and unique. And so what's telling about that is that he was, it literally came from the Monty Python cheese shop sketch. That was the inspiration for that idea. And the idea was that SpaceX was serious about its rocket business, but that they could have some fun too.
If you look at the way that the rocket and the rockets have developed from V2s, Walter Van Braun, etc., that's basically, it follows that timeline. So it's, say, from 1944 through to 1969 with the Saturn. That's an awfully long time to develop something. But in terms of what SpaceX is doing, this is developed into a whole new system incredibly quickly in terms of the turnaround.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Europe, right? You had the Ariane 5 rocket, which was great, but around 2010, 2012, leaders of the European Space Agency decided they needed a future version of the rocket, and they settled on the Ariane 6, which looks a lot like the Ariane 5. Now, it's modernized, but at the end of the day, it maybe costs a little bit less and has a little bit more performance than the Ariane 5. It's an evolution. It took, I think, on the order of 4 to 5 billion euro and a dozen years to bring that sort of upgraded version of the Ariane 6 online. And in the same period of time, SpaceX has gone from a very basic version of the Falcon 9 to a rocket that is reusable. Then they built the Falcon Heavy, and they've built Starship, which is potentially going to revolutionize everything. And it's just the efficiency of the private sector in this case versus an institutional approach, which is much more slower and methodical. Now, the Ariane 6 is certainly going to give Europe its own access to space, which I think it desires, and that's why they did the project. But it's not as nimble, as fast, or as creative, I think, as you can get when you really unleash the sort of entrepreneurial spirit.
And obviously Musk, very much in the news at the moment. He's a man who obviously follows his own path. Do you think this, obviously for everybody else who's working on these projects, perhaps Musk takes the, if you like, the major flack or whatever, and allows the backroom team, that's a bit of a crass word for it, but to get on and develop so that they can, as Buzz Aldrin famously always says, get your ass to Mars.
He definitely takes a lot of the flack, but Giles, he brings a lot of it on himself, right? He says pretty outrageous things. He inserted himself into an already controversial election, which was pretty close to 50-50, and has alienated or angered half of this country. I'm sure a lot of people around the world are not happy with him or his actions. And so he's really controversial. And if Donald Trump had lost this election, it would have cost Musk, but he didn't. He won. And so it was yet kind of another. So what Musk has done periodically over his career, he's doubled down. And on this election, then again, he doubled down, and it's going to end up benefiting SpaceX, because one of the things that really was holding it back was some of the government regulations here in the United States. And he and the new administration are going to be very aligned at sort of stripping some of those away and allowing SpaceX to move faster.
So, as you say, where do we go from here? Mars has got to be that at this point. That's the holy grail, isn't it? I suppose, really.
Well, Elon has apparently told incoming President Trump that they're going to go to Mars before the end of his second term. So that would be 2028. I think we're going to send humans to Mars in our lifetimes. I'd be very surprised if it's this decade. But clearly, the U.S. government will now be more fully behind Musk's ambitions, and we've never really seen that before. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch that unfold.
Indeed. What are you hoping that people are going to take from re-entry? Because I suppose a lot of people have seen sort of SpaceX and astronauts floating around on their news feeds. But is this the real story, and also sort of a little bit of the human element and the things that happen on developing this thing?
The most important story I wanted to tell with re-entry was how much of a struggle it was behind the scenes. And so it's not so much a book about Musk; it's a book about the engineers who built the rockets, who learned how to fly them into space and bring them back and land them on these small drone ships in the Atlantic Ocean, who built the first private human spacecraft, and just it was really difficult to do that. And so there were so many people that worked so hard. So Musk has the vision, but he has these incredibly talented engineers who work for him and who believe in sort of his idea of making humans multiplanetary. And so it's really their story.
Multiplanetarian. I hadn't heard that before, Eric, but I'm going to use that at some point in the future. The book is called Re-Entry, SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the Reusable Rockets that launched the second space age. You can order it, of course, via our own virtual bookstore. Eric, if people want to find you online, presumably you're relatively easy to, in the nicest possible way, find?
Absolutely. You can just Google my name or search for me, Eric Berger, and I write mostly at a website called Ars Technica, where we have a pretty good space coverage team.
The book is called Re-Entry. It's by Eric Berger. Eric, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.